All right, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Would like to call to order our Affordable Housing Trust meeting today, Wednesday, December 6th at 6 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and available through Zoom. First item on our agenda today is to review and approve the minutes from our November 1st meeting and also our April 11th meeting, I believe, correct? Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Does anyone want to make any comment or motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the November 11th first as written.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. With that, we're going to move right into a review of our draft for our
April 11th.
April 11th.
Oh, I'm sorry, and also for our April 11th meeting. If everyone has reviewed the minutes, would anyone like to make a comment or motion?
I'd like to make a comment because there's a blank there and we determined who the blank was on for the nominating. There, did you see the blank?
Yes.
So it was Richard Gregorio, so if we could add that to the minutes,
Okay.
we figured it out.
So, second by Mr. Renault. As far as nominating me as vice chair, it was Mr. Richard Gregorio
Correct.
who nominated myself as vice chair. So we would like to add that to the minutes from April 11th. Thank you.
A motion to accept the minutes from April 11th, 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move right into a review of our strategic plan. And thank you. We have John Cruz and Andrea from MAPC to help review this with us.
Yeah, while Jackie's getting this set up, Andrea, can you introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Harris-Long, and I'm the manager of Housing and Neighborhood Development, working with John. I've been working on this kind of in the background with John. He's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but really excited to be here with you all tonight. It's been nice to hear the progress that you all have been making. So look forward to helping in the discussion, but mostly just here to support it in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
So such a helpful font. Friendly.
But you know how long it's going to last.
Right. It's like, I know this is being rough. I'm just not that professional. I'm just doing my best here. Casual sort of way.
It's after 6, Beth. We're all just doing our best.
That's true. That's true.
It's been dark for 2 hours already.
And snowed.
Adam, can I ask for some technical assistance, please? Thank you. So John's got the cord I usually use for select board meetings over there. And I clicked, let me go back again. I've tried the VGA and the HDMI 1.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. No problem. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. And I apologize. I wish I'd been able to get this draft in front of everybody with a little bit more lead time than 24-ish hours. So in the future, we'll try to make sure that doesn't happen. But thank you all for being with me tonight. As was already stated, we have a couple things on our agenda tonight. They're kind of heavy lifting items, so we kept the agenda pretty short. We're going to talk about our feelings on this draft plan. We're going to talk about what we're going to do for the upcoming engagement event that we're scoped for, and then just talk about whatever the next steps are as we go ahead and try to get this all finalized. So what you have in front of you is a very rough draft. The final version will look much nicer. We're going to add a lot of additional narrative, other kind of finishing touches, formatting changes, cover page, acknowledgement pages. The appendices are blank. They'll all get filled out. You might have noticed there's some tables and things like that that are incomplete that clearly need a lot more work. If we want, we can spend time on that tonight, but we see that as kind of just taking all the feedback from tonight and flushing that out a little bit more. And then any other kind of additional elements, tables, charts, graphs, things like that, there's going to be a lot more of it. We just wanted to make sure that the meat and potatoes was in front of you guys tonight. You really had a good sense of the spirit and the direction in which we're moving so that we could have a conversation. So the next couple of slides are just kind of some of the questions that we have around framing the feedback that we'd like to get from you all tonight. What I would like to do is run through those few slides right now, and then after that we'll pause and turn things back over to you all. Rewind the slides to the start and say, okay, now we know kind of what we're here to talk about to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves, and then kind of go through the items bit by bit. Anybody got any questions, comments, concerns about that? Cool. We'll move right along then. So the first three sections are really just kind of overview information. And they're pretty light as it is because we want to give you guys something to kind of build off of and tell us if you like where we're going or if you want to see more, or if you're okay with where it's at. Purpose and background, the planning process for what we're doing for putting together the strategic plan, and a little bit of background information on the housing crisis and the response to it, particularly this body as being a response to the housing crisis. And then we'll talk about if there's any other background information, stats, or narrative that would be helpful to add in here to kind of flush this stuff out. We addressed the income criteria question very directly, and MAPC is recommending that we keep this kind of standard that's used throughout the country of 80% AMI is the low to moderate income, and we want to make sure that that's something that's okay with you all. If there's any thoughts or opposition to it, if you would prefer to keep this out of this and try to institutionalize it at the town level instead, we can have that conversation too. We define the powers of the trust and we define the purpose of the trust. What else would we like to see kind of as we talk about this, if there's any pieces of that puzzle that are missing that we need to kind of go through. Looking to have comments or thoughts on the funding sources that are listed. These are kind of just typical ways that housing trusts could get funded. They may not be all viable or realistic for Middleton, and we don't want to have unviable or unrealistic things in this plan. I know some of those things are maybe something else needs to happen before we can get there, like inclusionary zoning payments. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't include it, but that we'd have some notes about what it would take to get there, things like that. We put together some goals based on the conversations that we've all had and based on what we see as the desired impacts of this body. We put those together as increase the amount of affordable housing in Middleton, stabilize Middleton residents, and have a commitment to full transparency to really be able to build trust with the community. And should those be modified or refined at all? And the biggest part that's probably going to be the most impactful for the work that this body does moving forward is figuring out which kind of track do you want to focus on. And we put these into 3 different buckets: assistance for more people at a smaller scale, assistance for fewer people at a larger scale, or a greater focus on policy and advocacy activities. What, if any, modifications should be made here? And we don't need to make a decision tonight, but we are recommending that the committee at some point before this process is finalized really feel strongly that there's one direction that should be the primary focus of things moving forward. So I wanted to kind of just test the waters on what that preference is and what that looks like. I have my own hypotheses. I'm going to keep those to myself for right now. And then everything else. What else should we add? What is in here that maybe shouldn't be in here? Are there things that we should frame differently? And of course, the challenge of doing hyper-local work in a municipality that's not my home is I don't know if there's certain words or phrases that may seem harmless to me but could be loaded to anybody here. So this is part of what that gut check and making sure that we're talking about things in the right way in order for this plan to be received well by the community, and then making sure that that's all represented here. So these are my prompts. This is kind of what we hope to get out of this meeting, in addition to whatever thoughts anybody else has. Again, with the understanding that I do understand that you haven't had a whole lot of time to kind of look it over prior to this meeting. So with that, I would like to just go ahead and turn it back over to you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Forward to hearing everybody's thoughts.
Yeah, personally, I like the 80% AMI mark. It gives us the ability to impact more people than if we were to lower it to 50 or 30%. It kind of broadens the base of people that we can assist. And I think as far as the 3 bullets on what our purpose and what our intent are, I think a lot of it can be broken down into short term between the first 3 years with the limited funding we have now, where we are such a new body. I don't think any large scale opportunities really exist for us at the moment. Not that they wouldn't in the future, where there may be some land that we could potentially disperse or partner with someone like another group to come in and help but as far as helping residents who need assistance with small projects and small improvements to help make their property either more accessible, more affordable, up to code, and then making recommendations to our local governing bodies and at town meeting, whether it's our zoning bylaw review committee. I don't know whether we have the ability or authority to make certain recommendations on zoning changes. Same thing with planning board, but it would be incumbent on us to go back to our respective boards and, make those recommendations and make it known that the Affordable Housing Trust is either in favor or against certain things, or recommend something that may not be in the draft plans as they are now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the biggest thing that I can see is being challenging as you want to do this other kind of advocacy within the different realms of government here is going back to the way that we kind of frame the impacts and the activities to get to the impacts is making sure that we understand that this is the seat that this body has exists very strongly within the realm of things that you control as far as your funds and your direct activities. Everything else is very much limited to a advisory body who's certainly within your powers to say that you want to write a letter of support for something or write a letter against something or choose to speak up at town meeting about something or pass a resolution that says we are in favor of this development. We commend people for doing the right thing here. What I want to make sure that we don't end up doing is wandering into a situation where there becomes some kind of de facto sort of way of trying to having the negative inverse effect of hampering the development process. So we don't want to ever have a situation where a developer feels like they need to come here and make a presentation and win you guys over and all that kind of stuff. Between the connections you have with the other boards and committees, I think you're well positioned to kind of be that kind of in between conduit and the glue that ties the different departments together of the city and all the different boards and commissions of elected and appointed officials to say that you're the nexus talking about housing stuff in town. So you're definitely within your rights and your authority to exercise it that way, as long as, like I said, we're not doing anything that's going to slow things down or add another presentation or do something else that's going to, quite frankly, take up a lot of somebody's time and a lot of your time that ends up being a situation where at the end of the day, like I said, it's a recommending body, but there isn't a whole lot of teeth here. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that and we're all working from the same set of facts. And if there's any clarifying questions or thoughts about that from anybody.
I'd like to present an alternative point. I would like to see this body focus on track 2 rather than track 1. Track 1 seems like it's things that might affect, individuals, but it isn't addressing the problems that are keeping us from being able to hit our 10% number to have affordable housing in place. It could potentially, I don't know, it could potentially make affordability problems worse while making it easier for some people to buy houses without doing anything to address why there aren't houses for them to buy. And I'd rather see us put our time towards things that are potentially going to get us back in control of our own zoning.
I agree with you to a point, but I think we're limited in the funding and how new we are currently with, the 200,000 we have in funds now, assuming we have that from the CPC again next year, gets us to 400,000. There's very limited impact I think we can have on a large scale with that amount of money. That being said, if we set up a budget where, we're going to spend X amount of dollars per year, and on year 5, now this is what we're going to have, rolled over and accrued, we may be able to take a look at, some larger scale opportunities.
Can I make a very brief point of clarification?
Mhm.
So when we got the CPA money this year, it was 200,000, but that had been years of buildup of money because the CPA has to do money towards every of the 3 areas. So there won't be a second 200,000 this
Right.
year because that's from multiple years of the fund. The last time I looked it up, I think it's approximately like 35,000 a year that are designated to affordable housing.
Okay.
And that makes a stronger point from you.
Yeah, I think if
That suggests that we're not if like I'd rather see us put time towards fundraising, grant raising that
Yeah.
would let us have the bigger impact rather than piddle around on the margins. If we have a choice, we're only going to have so much time and energy,
Mhm.
staff time and energy to go into programs, and I'd rather that be spent getting to the point we actually want to be at rather than administering smaller programs that could fit even in other that aren't necessarily specific to the mission of this board.
I think the 80% is the way to go the first year too. I agree with Anthony.
And I think these are all good points, and these are all things where, like I said, we don't necessarily have to make a decision today.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we talk about in this plan, as far as how these tracks go, is it's really a question of where do you want to primarily focus
Yep.
your activities in the short term.
Mhm.
And of course, it doesn't mean if you said, well, maybe for instance, we're going to focus on track 1 and we want to do some kind of small scale stuff and really have an impact on people's lives right now.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that if there wasn't some kind of larger development opportunity or something that just kind of came to the town, that you all would say, well, we decided we're not going to look at that track, so we're not going to do it. Of course, you consider all options as they become available and see what the opportunities as they unfold. At the end of the day, there's a lot of unknown unknowns out there, and these are the kinds of things that we all have to be just cognizant of and work through. So we're not completely dismissing anything else. We're just saying this is the primary focus and these are secondary focuses. So keeping that in mind, along with all the capacity issues and the administrative stuff, and really it's a question of what are the kinds of things that you want to do and you want to see. But before we have a conversation on selecting what track that might be for a primary focus, we need to have the conversation on, do we like the tracks as they are, or should we be amending?
Mhm.
Can I ask a question about your zoning bylaw committee? Because I think
Sure.
that is something that we didn't explicitly mention here, but it seems like a good nexus for what you all are doing. And I'd love to just maybe hear like what they're up to and if they've been active. Have you been looking at a lot of zoning bylaw amendments or?
As far as I know, they're looking to, obviously we have the MBTA zoning, which
Yeah.
is kind of a high priority item, along with inclusionary zoning, some other changes. But the MBTA zoning, we recently had a town event where members of the community came in, gave their ideas on where they think Middleton is going to have to put up 50 acres of space and I believe it's 500 units of affordable housing. And where would we zone that? Or what areas would we do that? We have a minimum of 25 acres that has to be consecutive in one area. And there were some groups that said we'd like to see, a 25 acre minimum and then a bunch of small 5 acre continuous areas around the town. And then there were some that said, I would like to put all 50 where Ferncroft is, where the Ferncroft area is. So taking a look at that, I know the zoning committee is going to have a pretty big decision to make on a recommendation as far as where that's going to go.
Yeah.
And how that impacts us, I'm not quite sure, but I'd look for some guidance on that.
I think we have ideas.
What's that?
I think we have ideas.
Okay.
It seems like that's a really great opportunity for you all to think about like how can zoning unlock affordable housing.
Mhm.
And I think you mentioned inclusionary zoning is on the table as part of that process, and that's incredibly tied to what you all are trying to do. So
Yep.
I think it would be great for you all to come together as the board to say like we really strongly support inclusionary zoning, even though that's not something that we're tasked to do. We don't do zoning, but
But
that
just to
would
make that
be
recommendation
really
and make
aligned
it
with your
stronger.
mission of advancing affordable housing.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of a low-hanging fruit because you're not writing the inclusionary zoning, but I think on the flip side, what I was kind of thinking as you were talking is you all could kind of go to the zoning bylaw committee and say, we have this $200,000. Maybe you can give them a portion of that to hire MAPC or another consultant to help with inclusionary zoning or another zoning initiative that could remove barriers in zoning to affordable housing. So just to give you an idea of how I think you could interact.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think, Andrew, just to your point too, just for your edification for the public that might be watching, we do have a consultant on board right now through our planning department. So both Jason and Anthony are members of our planning board. So we're doing a comprehensive zoning review right now. So it includes the 3A, includes all the MBTA, but it also is a wider comprehensive look. So there's areas where there's inconsistencies, the bylaw disagrees, like it's been a long time coming. So we do have that funded in that process. Like that meeting happened, that event, but that's like an ongoing process. It's on our homepage. So I think the one thing I would ask the committee to consider is if that's a pathway you want to look at, that particular path of influencing zoning, you need to do that quicker than I think we're going to be down the 5-year strategic plan. So I think that's where focusing in tonight on what track, what of John's tracks you want to amend, what you want to influence is really critical, so that in January we can come together and you can come up with what you want to provide for feedback or what you want to highlight to that group. I just don't want to, if you want to participate as a body in that process, I just don't want you to miss the window before, you know, we're in public hearing season and then it's going on the warrant and then it's town meeting and suddenly we're in May and we feel like we missed the window. And I just don't want you guys to feel like that's happened.
So should someone on this board write a draft of a letter? Should we ask that someone write a draft of a letter?
I think you have to get through the discussion tonight that John's kind of pre-guided you of this draft plan. Personally, I think before you embark further, I think you all need to kind of gather on the same page with the big principles, recognizing you may not come to unanimity, but you may have some areas that you feel more strongly united than not on. But just bearing in mind that as you go through these tracks tonight.
It also might be something to bring up also where there's 3 separate boards that are dealing with ultimately almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe we do have a general meeting with, 2 or 3 members of each board get together and go, this is what we're doing. We have consultants that are doing on affordable housing. We have consultant that is doing, our inclusionary zoning on the planning board. And then, you got the biggest thing that we're dealing with now is, trying to hit that 10% mark by 2025.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be very tough for Middleton to do. And the reason why is we end up losing some funding if we don't. And that's the whole thing. I think a lot of these boards need to all get on board and go, all right, we have someone doing this, we have someone doing that, we have someone doing this. Let's get together and, roll the ball this so everybody's on the same page. I think it would be a lot easier doing it that way instead of, making a letter. We go back to our board, you go back to your board, you go back to your board, and everybody's like, oh. And then, you're here. I think if we could get a few people from each committee to get together and,
I think that's a great suggestion when we get to talking about engagement for the strategic plan for January, whether it's, 2 or 3 people from this group go to a planning board. The zoning bylaw review committee has completed their work and that's gotten folded into what the vendor for the comprehensive work is doing. But I think maybe it's a joint meeting with the planning board in January or early February might be a really useful tool. And then later, because bylaw review is its own animal,
right.
But it is a bit unique and different in the sense that they're not coming at it from a policy making perspective. They're looking at it for, to be congruent with what we currently have on the books and, from a codification standpoint
right.
versus a policy making standpoint. But if there's another group, if it's maybe the zoning board of appeals, the planning board, this
at
group.
least so zoning knows what what the bodies of our 2 committees are actually doing. So they're kind of knowing, all right, well, we are taking care of, so if they get hit with somebody going, oh, well, we have to do an affordable thing and something gets presented to them and they're like, we didn't hear anything all about this, it'd be something, this is, everybody gets on the same page.
So does that feel like something you'd like scheduled is to invite the planning board and the zoning board to a joint session of all 3?
I think that's a great idea.
And if I'm going to jump ahead in my agenda a little bit for tonight, just to kind of make your workflow and thinking about this a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
We're scoped for one more meeting with you all, and that meeting is supposed to be talking about kind of like a more finalized version of this, plus talking about the results of the community engagement. That is in no way, shape, or form going to be done and ready by January. We see that stuff happening in January.
Mhm.
So on our end, we see MAPC meeting with you all again at the February meeting on February 8th. So please, by all means, feel free to devote as much time in January to whatever else you guys need to tackle as you see fit.
Okay.
Very good.
So I'll extend that invitation through the town planner to the planning board and the zoning board this week, and I'll offer your January regularly scheduled meeting, and we'll see if we can get availability of those groups or if we need to readjust.
Mhm.
Is that
Yeah, that sounds good.
I think that sounds great.
But
Okay.
check with Ryan first in case we change that.
Yeah. You have to
Yes.
check with Brian, yeah. You're on the planning board, right, Anthony?
I am.
Yeah, so you have.
So
you
I'll
should
see them
definitely-
Wednesday.
Yeah, oh, next
Week from
Wednesday.
week from
I see.
today here at the planning board meeting. So I can let them know.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, my head's up.
So let's pull the conversation back a little bit and shift our focus to the stuff that's up on the screen right now. Just looking at the first couple sections in here. I know the first two are very light. It's a half page between all of them, and then a little bit more, about a page and a half between the housing crisis and response part. Is this something that you all are comfortable with as written, or are there things that you'd like to see different happen?
And the
No.
purpose and background, you're saying?
Yeah, the
first one?
purpose and background planning process, and then the housing.
Oh, all
crisis.
three, okay.
No, I think it sets the stage well for people that aren't on the board that look at the document and say, okay, I understand why they exist, what they're here for, and yeah, I like it.
And understand too, a lot of our perspective on this stuff is wanting to make this document accessible
Mhm.
and trying to be poignant and making sure that we're saying what needs to be said without adding a whole lot of language that becomes some 50-page thing and nobody will ever want to look at,
Yep.
So
Can I
we're
ask
going
a,
to be very careful about what we talk about and how we do so.
can I just ask a general question,
Yeah, please
John? To you two, there, either one of you, whoever would like to answer. Is this, I'm very unfamiliar with this, this is what you do. Is this a boilerplate plan that you've done with other towns and you slide in our information?
This is not the kind of thing we usually do. We've done a handful of them over the years, and I've done a handful of these in different positions, but there's nothing about this that's boilerplate. This is all being, the only thing that's boilerplate is this little housing affordability gap chart. That's just an Excel spreadsheet that I have that I plug different numbers in for each community.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, all of this is all originally written.
I'm just wondering, when I say boilerplate, have all the towns that you've put this in front of say, we're satisfied with it, how well was it received? So I was just trying to understand that.
Yeah, I think they're all kind of structured in a similar way where you talk about the background and then the situation and the tools and the options and the activities and things like that.
Okay.
So we took a lot of lessons learned from other communities that have done similar things, not just ones that are MAPC clients as well.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody else feeling good?
Yes.
And at the same time as well, I'd like to invite everyone to know that this is a lot of stuff to kind of process in a short period of time. So especially since we're not going to be meeting in January, if anybody has any kind of thoughts or anything that they feel would be important to add or want to convey over, Jackie, could you handle kind of just collecting any thoughts that people have and then sending them over to me?
happy to?
Yeah, so please do that. Send them to Jackie. Don't talk amongst yourselves on email and run afoul of open meeting laws or anything like that. I think if we do all that, we can get all the engagement we need to make any kind of changes that we're not able to have a conversation with tonight. And if it's something we need to have a conversation about, we'll figure out a time to do that. So we talked about the income criteria part a little bit. Everybody in agreement with that? Everyone happy with how that looks?
Yes.
We talk about the purpose and the powers of the trust. That's a little bit out of order for how it actually appears in here. But I want to make sure that we got all of this stuff right. The powers of the trust are easy. That's just more of a layman's terms kind of version of the legalese that's in the Declaration of Trust. But the rest of the stuff, I want to make sure that we really feel like we got this right. And if you all are in agreement that the way the purpose is laid out and the way everything else is talked about is in a way that you feel is accurate, if this is the way that you would explain this work that you do when your friends ask you what you've been up to, and you say, now this whole can of worms about this affordable housing trust thing. Is this going to be an accurate way of how you would talk about it?
One question I had on the powers of affordable housing trust, I went through it. There was a portion, part 11, borrow money. Where would we borrow money from, and what would that process look like? And would that be something that is, I'm assuming, would be jointly discussed with the select board, and if we were to undergo a larger project where borrowing money was necessary?
Yeah, I think it is. This part is it's a modification of the language that's in the state statute. So the statute defines everything and says this is broadly what we think trusts should be able to do, and if they want to amend it, they can, and if they don't have to.
Okay.
That is one of the ones that the state says this is just something that you guys can do. So if you, for instance, said we know we're going to get give or take $30,000 to $40,000 a year out of the CPC money, and we could potentially pay back a loan if we wanted to get $200,000 today to do something and have security for it and things like that. That's something that would be within the power of things you guys could do.
Okay.
As far as needing select board approval, I don't think that you would need select board approval if it's an explicit power of the trust.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
it depends on
Yeah.
Middleton. It depends on Middleton.
Does that have to go to
Well,
town meeting?
Yeah, it would have to go, so it would not only be select board, but it'd have to go on a town meeting warrant
Yeah.
and be authorized by town meeting as borrowing.
Oh,
Um,
so
so
that's regardless of the source,
regardless of the source, CPA funding has to be appropriated at town meeting,
right?
and it has to be appropriated to pay debt. So that would be a town meeting process
Gotcha,
because
okay.
and so what that would look like is if there were a project in which you wanted to go out and borrow, it would have to be, aligned with the town meeting cycle. You'd have to identify a funding source. It would go to the select board, get added to the warrant. And then we would work with our financial advisors the way we did for, the municipal project borrowing. Thankfully we have very good bonding rates. Our Moody's and Standard & Poor rates are very competitive. But you would go through all of that same process. That part doesn't change for us. If it's CPA funding, you have to follow the same rules as though it was our regular tax dollars.
Okay. So it may not be the most practical thing. It may not be the easiest thing to pull off. I think that's going to be one of those if the stars are aligning and the lightning strikes the way it needs to.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that it's a tool that you have in your pocket in case you decide to go that route at some point, or if it makes sense to go that route.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts on the powers that are listed in here? And I know, Jackie, you and I are still working our way through some questions on some of these things with the city attorney. But aside from that, I want to make sure that everyone's kind of clear on what this group can do and what they can't do. And it is very much one of those things where the powers are listed, and if the power isn't in there, you probably can't do it.
I think it all makes sense to me. Like you said, it's kind of a broad, intentionally broadened, ability for what we can and can't do, and internally we'd have to determine what's best. What do we want to engage in? What do we not want to engage in? But this is a good broad start that we can kind of narrow down as we go to figure out what we will or will not be engaging in.
Great.
One thing I do notice on the 80% area median income is that it doesn't take into account wealth, right? So
Yeah, it is very much based on income and not wealth, which is part of the larger picture of how we view just kind of money in this country. That is a big problem. And it's one of those things where there's a lot of people. Our feeling from these focus group conversations is that there's a lot of people that have a lot of wealth, and they end up kind of feeling financially strangled by that wealth and the way that they have property values that have increased substantially, and it's made them wealthy, but it's not putting any money into their pocket, and instead they're paying whatever the $10,000, $12,000 a year in property taxes. So it's wealth that's costing them money. And this just adds to the complications of all these other sorts of things. But no, it's not looking at what your investments look like that you could cash out and maybe become a millionaire overnight if you wanted to. It doesn't take into account any kind of real property you have that has value, real estate, boats, airplanes, whatever it might be. So it certainly is a limited scope in what it's going to be, but I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of people who are going to need help are going to fall into this category. And I think that by the time people hit the point where they're like, I really need help doing something, they've exhausted all other options, and a lot of times that involves selling off other assets or reevaluating situations and things like that. So it is an inherently imperfect system. I do like it much better than a lot of the other kind of national conversation things like the poverty line, which, as I think we all know, is probably not where it needs to be and is a flat standard for the whole country. I like that this takes into account the different economics of the different regions and family size and things like that. So it is not perfect. It is very flawed. It has lots of things that maybe in a perfect world we do differently. It is kind of the best measure that we have for right now, unless we wanted to really kind of take a hyper-local look at it and say, like, well, what is the 80% for Middleton or something like that? And then it's just a lot more work for you guys to do every year.
Yeah, it looks like we're like 10% more than that anyway. I was just
Yeah.
like remembering the thing you were talking, stories you told about people who would, retire, put income into a trust or something, and then be like, oh, I've got no income.
Yep.
Well, you
I
can't
like
cover all those things. I mean, I think you have to stick to the
Yeah.
what is done in the country and the norm of income. The idea is, like you made a good point, John, someone may have property, but it's not liquid. Income is income. So that's the only way we can drive this. We can't cover every base. I think it'd be quite unfair to do that and wrong.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And at the same time, we have to recognize that there's a lot of people who end up in situations where they're like, well, I am low income, I'm on a fixed income. If I sold my house, I would be in a much higher tax bracket, and maybe I'd have a little bit of money for a couple of years, but then I'm going to end up right back where I started.
Right.
But in the meantime, I'm not going to qualify because now all of a sudden my income is much higher.
Right.
So it's very nuanced, and it becomes very challenging to help all the people that need help because programs are broadly based and they make a lot of assumptions about society. A lot of people are not going to fit those assumptions, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think
So-
you've done a good job with the way you've done it.
Thank you.
I also wouldn't want to like incentivize people to put themselves in those financial situations in order to qualify, right? Like that seems, but I understand the limitations of the frameworks we're working under.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on. Moving forward, I want to talk about, we have a lot of comments in here on the development process and how you all can potentially insert yourselves into that. I think that this is something that's going to require a little bit of time to kind of sit and stew on and see if it makes sense the way that it's laid out here, or if there's other changes we want to make in some areas where we might want to be a little bit more specific. It's a little bit broad as it is, and kind of talks about some specifics as far as who would need to convene what and be the person kind of going back and forth. The meeting frequency thing, I don't think we need to have a discussion about tonight.
I was going to say with the development process, actually, I'd kind of like to see something similar for a land disposition at that same level of like operation and funding, laying out a process like this. Because I thought that this one for like how we would fit within the development process was great. I really appreciated that
So another
clarity, and I'd
section
like
of how
to see
you
one.
could fit in with the town disposing of town and
Yes, yeah, that would be great.
great. Yeah, that's certainly something we can look at.
While we're on that topic, maybe we can talk about that for a minute. That was one of the things I think included in one of the tracks. And that I think is another good space for you all to have influence. And we do see other affordable housing trusts kind of leading that process. And so that's something that we can elaborate on in the document if you want us to, or that could be something that you think about. That doesn't require a lot of money because you already have the resource, the asset. And then you could maybe use a smaller chunk of your current allocation to help fund a disposition process.
So I know normally that would also have to go in front of town meeting where we, even if we were to allocate funds for an appraisal to dispose of town land, that would have to get approved through town meeting. Are you saying that we would not have, if let's say we wanted to just get an appraisal on a parcel that we were looking to dispose of, is that saying that this board could fund that without going to town meeting?
You could fund it jointly with, so any expenditure you do has to also be approved by the select board. That's just how your funding structure works.
Mhm.
But essentially, yes, you could, if you had a parcel in mind for disposal that you wanted to see as affordable units, you could approve it, make a recommendation to the select board, and fund an appraisal.
Okay.
You could also seek grant funding for something like that, as well as a funding source for something like that.
Mhm.
But the only thing that I would say to that, just as a reminder, is that we did fund in the 2023 annual town meeting $50,000 for some of the various town properties because of the municipal complex. We're going to be having a lot of properties on our books that we're no longer going to be needing.
Mhm.
And I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that we don't want to, I can get you a list of those properties and what's being focused on and what engineering and or appraising is being done for those.
Okay. that'd be
The select board hasn't approved everything yet. They've just started. Just because I think I want to be mindful that this group I don't know if I'll always be with you at every meeting, and I don't want to put you in a position to duplicate efforts.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Is that process going to be handled by the administration, or are they going to form a separate committee?
So the select board elected within the last year to handle that process themselves directly. So it'll all be in public session. It'll all be a public process. But they've made the determination not to create a separate committee.
Going back to sort of some of these procedural questions too, I think that through this planning process, there are opportunities for you to think about the way that you have to do business for different decisions. And I know one of the things that a lot of affordable housing trusts often do is have it so that the CPA funds automatically come to you every year, so you don't have to do that town meeting vote. If there are other kind of procedural things that could make it easier for you to do your business and not have to maybe have as many of those meetings, I think that's something else that maybe we can work with Jackie on to understand where those processes are, where they could potentially be streamlined to help you just be able to do your business more easily.
Yeah, that'd be great. If we have new bodies in here, new individuals in here, 10, 15 years from now, to have those procedures outlined within, the plan to say, all right, if you are, in the process of doing X, Y, and Z, these are the other boards, committees that you need to engage with, and this would be the process for that.
Or where maybe they want to defer that kind of power to you all so that you can kind of jump a step and kind of streamline a process.
Yeah, that would help.
But I think either way, it would be wonderful to get an operations guide for this group out of it too, because something to keep in mind is even if one of you, decides that you don't have the time commitment for this, that means a full, we have to do the whole registry of deeds process over again, and redo the trust and add the new trustee on, because you are trustees of those funds. So that's like a good area to have an operations guide, because certainly the board and committee handbook can help you with your day-to-day. But with this group in particular, it is a more legally dense policy area than most. So I think that would be a really good outcome, and that's something we could put on the town website, have available so that every new trustee coming on board is going to have like a 5 or 10 page guide of the basics of what to do when you add a new member, what to do when somebody leaves, all those procedural hook items, because I think that's something I've saw in my prior community as well, as we had a very active trust. It was great. They got a lot done. But when one person moves out of town or leaves, they take a lot of institutional knowledge with them. And we've been doing this with staff. We've been trying to do it with some of the boards and committees, of being more preventative with succession planning, kind of preventative maintenance for committees rather than just for our vehicles.
Yeah, that'd be huge to have SOPs in place for new individuals coming on.
Is that something you would put together, Jackie?
Hopefully I can work with John and Andrea to take some of what they've already been working on, and then we'll make it kind of like tonight, where they can give the general pieces of the puzzle, and then I can flesh out, like, based on our local processes, our local bylaws, the details. I think that's an easy lift, hopefully.
Yeah, I think we can think about how we can do that. But yeah, I feel like we have a lot of information that
We need to just get it on paper. Yeah.
It's always the hardest part.
So looking at the funding sources on page 7, really what we have here are kind of bleeds over into page 8 just a little bit. Just different options of very, it's not an exhaustive list, it's not ever gonna be complete because there's always new creative ways to do things. But this is really designed to say these are very typical ways that communities around the country and around the region fund their affordable housing trusts and descriptions of what it is and what it means. So is there anything on here that would absolutely be a non-starter, that would just simply never happen here, that isn't worth a conversation, that we could kind of strike from the list? Or anything that we could encourage adding on here that we don't think is listed, if anybody's available, other funding streams or revenues or something to consider in the back of your head about this?
So you mentioned developer fees, but would developer contributions in lieu of certain waivers also be something that we would consider? So I know on the planning board, not that we like to do it, but in some cases, with a sidewalk, we have a general sidewalk fund.
Right.
If there's a developer and there's a certain situation where the developer looks for a waiver to only put the sidewalk on one side of the street, not on both, we would typically ask for a developer contribution. So it's not really a fee that they pay up front with the application, but in consideration of the waiver, we would ask them for that contribution. Is that something similar that boards and committees would be able to do, whether it's the ZBA or planning board, through a waiver process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the same thing as what the inclusionary zoning payments look like, because those are the same kind of situation. It's a payment in lieu of something else.
Mhm.
So we might be able to expand this definition of developer fees to be developer fees and other in lieu payments or something like that, and expand what the definition looks like. But that's definitely the same thing.
Yeah, I think we can look at how your current, like the sidewalk example works, because sometimes there are some legal hangups to the type of contribution, but we can talk to Jackie about maybe how that works.
I think too, that's actually a really good topic to have a conversation with if we're having a joint meeting with the planning board and the zoning board of appeals anyway. To me, that's a really important conversation to have as a full group and get their, obviously both of you represent the plan, Jason and Anthony represent the planning board. But I think there's the legality of it all. Like right now we have that sidewalk stabilization fund. We're not seeing a lot of money going into it. Takes a 2/3 vote of town meeting to expend from it. There are other pathways for things like that, but getting a sense of those two committees, if that's something they're gonna want to continue to do as a practice. And I just think that's a great area to make sure we're really vetting this part of this particular item in the plan, because some people feel really strongly in either direction about this particular approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just have less context on this, but tax title sales, how have those traditionally been handled here in Middleton? Is that
Well, that's a wonderful question. Since I've been here, I don't think we've done much yet. But basically, when a property is there's a whole litany of legalities before we foreclose on a property. It's a multi-year process before we get to foreclosure. There's a special attorney that comes on, a tax title attorney that we contract with. It's a really extensive process to get into foreclosure. And then once we do have the property on our books, you get back to the disposition project, which is where do you need an appraisal? It has to go to be reviewed by legal. The disposition, though, for foreclosed properties is a little different than, a typical municipal property. I don't know if you have to go back to town meeting for foreclosed tax title properties. It may just be that you can do an auction, but
In previous years, they've done auctions.
Yeah, and that's typically the plan, but you typically wait to do it until you have a number of them because of the cost associated with all of the legalities and the auction. And
I couldn't tell you the last time they've done one. I know there's a piece of property next to my house I know they haven't paid the taxes in over 20 years.
yeah, I'm gonna say it's probably 15 or 20 years since we've sold properties from tax title. I couldn't tell you. I know that it's kind of constantly, we also have a really high return rate. So some communities, if their collections rates are lower, they do more tax title work, but our collections rates are usually pretty steady. so that's an area though where you could make a recommendation. You could exert influence by making a recommendation to the select board that you'd like to see, you know, properties that, and this is just an off the cuff example that I've seen other trusts do, any property in town that is foreclosed through tax title that has an ability for a septic to be added or on a current septic on the property could be, if that could be first reviewed by this committee before being disposed of for affordable housing purposes.
So that it basically acts on the same thing we do in the planning board of first right of refusal.
Yeah, you could ask the select board to give you first right of refusal on those tax title properties. But that's like where you could ask them, could flesh out what you want that to look like, and then make a recommendation to the select board and see if they would approve it as a policy. But a good,
or as suggested, this was suggesting just like a percentage of those
oh, the revenues,
the revenue from that
yeah,
designated to this.
that could definitely be a solution as well.
If it doesn't happen, there's not much point in going and trying to
Well,
get that
it's just
done.
not going to be regular income, and that's the one thing. Like finding regular income, you know, that often just falls to free cash because it's so uncommon.
So it sounds like maybe take it out of this list, but add it as a potential in one of your tracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't think any of these things necessarily need to be regular income. It's great if they are. And certainly a lot of them are set up in ways where they can be, you know, regular CPA fund allocation, cell phone lease payments. If the select board says we're going to donate a certain amount of money out of the general fund every year, stuff like that, those are all regular payment kind of things. But I think any kind of irregular payments or one-offs, you know, inclusionary zoning things, tax title sales, fundraising events that you all might want to put together, like those are all things that have a certain amount of benefit to them, even if it's not going to be a regular revenue stream. So I don't know if that's necessarily a reason to strike it, but I think it's worth taking a look at if it's one of those things where it's like if this never happened, then maybe we'll address it when it comes.
I mean, it's something that needs to happen soon.
Okay. So maybe the timing's good.
Yeah, I would just, my only caution would be is that that's not something that's on fire ever. That's very much a back burner item. So I think it may be actually a good thing if this committee takes an interest, because it might.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to have, you know, right of first refusal or something, that is at least somebody who's looking at it and
Yeah. And
interested.
I think I would be careful to not. I think it would be the concept where you had the right of first refusal from the board, but don't want people to confuse it with the actual legal process of right of first refusal.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to develop a policy for the select board where you get to vet properties before they're auctioned, that's something you could ask of them.
Right.
And then we talk a little bit about what may seem obtainable in the short term. I wanted to get feedback on if that seems realistic or not.
I know the first one says more people live in deed restricted affordable housing, but I would like to see the percentage targets specifically called out, because if we just grew a bunch of housing in the city or in the town, we might be able to, we might end up with more people in affordable housing and our percentage dropping, and that's sort of what we're trying to avoid.
I think you're getting ahead of me a little bit.
Sorry, the making an impact is.
No, we're talking
sorry.
about the items under the table for the funding sources.
Oh,
It
okay.
says these are the ones that may be the most obtainable in the short term. And I'd like to see if that's a list that we might need to modify a little bit. So it talks about the developer fees, tax title sales. There is a caveat that they may not be realistic if the tax title sales are rare. Municipal lease payments and private donations. I think we could add the CPA funds to that list if we know that we're going to be getting regular money from them.
I think CPA would be good to add. I'm curious what type of fundraising campaigns you've seen across the state, what has been successful, what may not have been successful for some different communities.
I think we need to define success in a little bit of a different way.
Okay.
Like that. I think that for you guys, the biggest benefit for doing something like that would be to really raise awareness and let people know what's going on. And I think you could certainly do, like, there's all kinds of things that people can theoretically do for things like this, ranging from ice cream socials to galas with silent auctions and donated items from, Tom Brady or whoever else, So there's a wide range of any kind of thing that you may have seen in the nonprofit space or the philanthropic space that could be explored here. But I think the biggest thing that's going to be helpful for you guys is you're trying to institutionalize this body and let people know who you are and what you're doing is going to be like small scale events that maybe cost between $25 and $50 for someone to attend. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of money, but it gets the word out. It lets people know what's going on. It gives them a chance to meet you all, have an idea as far as what work is actually being done, a little bit of a talk to say, this is what we're doing. We're trying to accomplish this thing. Thank you all for being a part of it, and bring people into the fold of this process and let them know just what kinds of work you're doing, what track are you focused on, where are you seeing you need to kind of move things and things like that. So I think there's a lot of intrinsic value in doing fundraising work that may not be a totally heavy lift.
Yep.
That would do a whole lot more just for goodwill in the town.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Of course, if anybody has friends with deep pockets who you'd like to make a phone call to, that could also be wildly beneficial.
I was just thinking more of it could potentially be a win-win for a local business. If I know we probably wouldn't set up a golf tournament like I know the Middleton Board of Trade has a golf tournament at Ferncroft every year, but maybe hosting like an event at the clubhouse in Middleton with,
Sure.
It would help a local business. Maybe they would give us a better rate on 4 or 5 simulators if we can get a bunch of groups together, a group of people. So that was more along the line that I was thinking of.
Yeah,
like you said, ice cream social
totally.
at Richardson's, or whatever the case may be, and partner with local businesses to help support that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can get creative with it. You can really bring people into the fold and help the local businesses at the same time. Do a lot of other just extra kind of awareness kind of stuff at a time when it's great that there's a couple hundred people watching out there in cyberspace, but we need to make sure that it reaches a lot further than that. So
Absolutely. Thanks.
So should we take off tax title sales? Just take it off the check?
Is it a goal for you though? Even if it doesn't happen, would it be a?
We have no control over it, and this
Yeah.
has been done in 20 years. Doesn't seem like it's
and really, like it's saying, out of all the things in the list, this looks like it might be the low hanging fruit. If it's
Yeah.
not low hanging fruit, we can put it back in the tree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll look at the sales and with the CPC part.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next item in my presentation is the goals. I do want to address some of the things with the impacts first. This is it's the same version that we talked through at the last meeting. Some of those we kind of consolidated under point number 2. And there was some wording that I changed a little bit just to make sure it's a little bit more inclusive. So we've had things about homes, home stabilization for seniors and people with disabilities. We changed that to say homes are in good condition and free of building code or other safety violations or concerns. And people who need an accessible home can live in one, and made sure that those weren't too hyper targeted in case there were other folks that fell outside of those demographics who needed help but still otherwise income qualified.
Mhm.
But other than that, it's pretty much exactly the same as where we left it last month.
And Beth, I know you were talking about this first one.
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. So I would like to see some comment about increasing the percentage of housing that's deeded affordable.
Yeah.
In Middleton.
Yeah, I think that's what we were trying to get at here, and maybe we can just rephrase it to be a little clearer. Because if you have more of those units, more people will hopefully be living there because you have more units.
Right, but this is where I think percentage matters, because if we did, if if we got a bunch more housing for some other reason, we could potentially increase the number of affordable units and still be going backwards on our
Yeah.
percentages.
Right.
So a little bit stronger language on making sure that we're working to increase the SHI number.
But just to make sure I understand you right, you're kind of increasing proportionally. So if you have more market rate or non-deed restricted housing, you're keeping pace with your affordable housing so that your number doesn't become imbalanced.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I
Yes.
was understanding
Yeah.
correctly.
It's not just about like more housing is great. We need a higher percentage of all the housing that is needed affordable.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe the more is just a higher percentage of people.
Yeah.
So moving forward, we have these 3 goals and we put them into 2 buckets. So we got the 3 goals of increasing the amount of affordable housing, stabilizing residents who are already here. So we kind of
I'm
changed
not in love with the word stabilize.
excuse me?
I'm not in love with the word stabilize, because it
Yeah.
sounds like we have unstable.
Yeah, and really what this was trying to do is get at the spirit of preventing displacement.
Yeah, so it's a retention
Yeah,
issue. So instead, maybe just change the word stabilize to retain.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
I'm good with that.
Agree with that.
Train residents and having full transparency in the activities of the trust. So to achieve those goals, we put these 2 big buckets of help that you guys are going to be doing and the ways that you're going to be having activities to assist other folks. We see that as being one of 2 things, either the programs that help individuals or some kind of assistance to the town that helps the town to create more affordable housing. And the direct assistance to people is a little bit more, direct. Right, those would be some of the programs we talked about last time: home repair and building codes, and getting things up to where they need to be.
The lowercase a.
Lowercase a, working with naturally occurring stuff, maybe down payment assistance, whatever it might be, and then everything else is the government side, the figuring out the zoning bylaw stuff, figuring out inclusionary zoning policies. Working to act as a conduit between the things that people would like to see happen on housing and making sure it actually gets done. Conversations with developers, whatever it might be. So it's either direct programs for people or kind of everything else. And I wanted to just gut check that with you all to make sure that all makes sense. Or if that needs to be changed at all. Sounds like we're feeling pretty good about it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're going to skip over the logic model stuff that we've talked about extensively and move on to the 3 tracks. So this is something that we had in our scope that was reviewed early on. So we were going to put together 3 different ways of kind of moving forward and then leave it up to you all to see if these are kind of the right things. And jumping ahead of myself again a little bit is we're going to have, I envision part of the feedback that we're going to want to get from the public is, are these the right tracks to consider, and are these the right ways to consider it, and how would you kind of rank them, and what would you want to see, and things like that. And of course, those are things that we'll take into consideration. It's not necessarily going to completely drive this process, and everything has to be considered within the avenue in which the data was gathered and things like that. But I want to just take this time to shut up for a few minutes and hear what everybody has to say about how things look right now.
I like that. I think I mentioned before that I think in the near term, track 1 is my preferred option. With home repairs, things like that, helping people age in place. I know it doesn't do much for our percentages as far as meeting our state affordability goals, but I think it would be really helpful and getting the word out there so that we had talked last meeting about, it being, it's hard for people to come forward and say, I'm in need, or, I would appreciate your assistance. It's trying to find ways that we can be proactive in identifying those individuals and saying, you've earned this, you've been a taxpaying resident, you're a valued member of our community, let us help. That's just my personal thoughts on it.
What's the numbers on smaller scale versus larger scale? Do you have a dollar value?
I don't, because it's really going to depend on what activities you want to pursue and through which way you want to do it. So let's take the home repair thing, because I feel like that's an easy one to kind of split down into. You can look at it and say, you know what, we're going to dedicate X amount of money this year to this home repair program and let people apply, and whatever the money's out, the money's out. You could also set limits to it that says, you know, we have X number of $1,500 grants that we're going to give to people, and keep the scope small and have a wider net that you cast. So there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of split this up, and a lot of different ways that you could look at it and say, this is how we want to structure this program, and this is what we see as the outcomes and outputs of that program individually. So it's a little bit more granular than what we're able to do here. It really depends on you all and what you want to do out of it. I think it makes sense to approach something, at least initially, from like a pilot program standpoint, and say, if we do it this way, dedicate a certain amount of money to it, and then come back and reevaluate. Did this make the impact that we wanted? Did it do the things that we wanted it to do? Do we think it would be more successful with more money? Things like that. So I think at the end of the day, they are designed to work with smaller budgets as opposed to working with larger budgets. A lot of things I feel like in track 2, you have to have the opportunity in front of you to be able to do that. And maybe that works a little bit better as maybe not a 1 to 3 year goal, but a 3 to 5 year or a 3 to 6 or 7 year goal. But it's really up to you guys. So there's a lot of different ways in which things can happen here, and a lot of it's going to be up to you to figure out how you want to make this work. And part of the conversations of going through this planning process is getting you all to the point where you sit here and you listen to me talk about all of my nonsense, and you get to a point where you're saying, I like the way this could go, or I like the way that could go. And then in a couple months, once you're further into the next year and you're taking the reins on all of this, you're in a good position to have really good conversations about it and see what you want to advocate for.
I like the idea of a pilot program, and I also want to be almost intentionally vague on it.
Sure.
Just so that we don't limit ourselves. If an opportunity comes up, let's say we have, you know, a young member of the community who's a service member, comes back, you know, disabled, you know, maybe happens to lose a leg. There could be numerous renovations that they need in order for their home to be compatible for them, whether it's, you know, no longer being able to get into their clawfoot tub, or you know, a handicap accessible ramp. You know, all those things would get pretty pricey to remodel a bathroom or build a ramp, different things that they would need.
I mean, part of why I was asking
that's
about.
a good idea. I mean,
What's that?
that's commendable to focus like that, I think.
Yeah.
And have that thought. Thank you.
I mean, part of why I was asking about monetary values is because it's like, you know, I recently replaced the windows in my house, and that was $60,000. You know, a down payment for a cheap starter home in this town is $100,000. The amount of impact we're going to be able to have there, it may very well be that it's no cheaper to do those small programs than it is to undertake some of the larger ones.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. And that's part of why I prefaced this conversation with, we don't necessarily need to pick a track tonight. I think especially after looking at this for one day and having a few people not here, that's probably not the best course of action. So my recommendation for today would be to see, we're going to put these to the public to get their thoughts on it. Are these the right things that we should be putting to the public, and are we comfortable doing that and having that conversation with them? And while that process plays itself out, we can start thinking about things like that, because stuff like that is important. And at the end of the day, maybe the impacts aren't as great as you would think, and maybe it needs to be much more limited in scope and seeing what you can do with it. So I think there's a lot of things to consider there for sure.
I think the other thing we're going to have to think about is that transparency piece we talked about earlier, of like that story, you know, you just told. I think that's a great example of, you know, sort of the classic narrative, but government programs are there to help everybody who qualifies, or as many people who qualify as possible, or at least under very transparent definitions, processes, things where people can trust that their tax dollars are going evenly as opposed to, you know, more charity approaches that can pick and choose the happy narratives that
Yeah.
we'd like to tell.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's one of those things where once you decide on what a pilot program would look like, you need to kind of structure it and say, you know, we will accept applications year round, and we will only accept them during these times unless there's a special circumstance. And this is what you can apply for, and have like a form set up and standardized, and know where it's going to go, and know when the reviews are going to happen, and kind of what that internal process will look like for getting there. And that will have as much to do with desire as it will bandwidth of this body, and of course bandwidth of the municipal staff, who is not 8 people.
Yeah, same
so-
thing as getting, you know, making sure that someone doesn't apply, get the money, and then don't use it in the correct way, or just, you know, yeah, they got it, and then 6-8 months down the road they finally use the. You got to give them a, you know, you have to give them a structure of, you know, it has to be used for this and a long amount of time, and
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of different ways that kind of stuff can happen. But for right now, do these 3 make sense? Do they make sense kind of as written? Do we feel good about this? Or are there things that we feel we'd like to amend or change the wording on, or strengthen wording on, or weaken wording on?
Can I offer one thought just with as folks consider the tracks too? The other thing to think about with these tracks, think about who your collaborators could be on these tracks as well. So I think it gets, you know, really challenging because you're focused on you and what impact the Affordable Housing Trust can make. But there's an incredible power when it comes to dealing with affordable housing with partnerships, whether it's nonprofit development companies, private developers, community organizations. You know, in the example that Anthony brought up, you know, if you're trying to work where you get you do a small program and you do get a veteran in that circumstance, that example, we do have a veterans department. We have a veterans donation account. There are other things to other groups that can also like collaborate with you and provide services. So that's one thing I would kind of put to the committee as you go through these tracks, you know, as you spend more time with this document, think about the people who could collaborate with you on any of these tracks, because that could be getting you a lot more mileage, because you are limited on funds. We're limited on the CPA. And, you know, it's hard to get going. Like, this is the hardest part that you're doing right now, is the thinking through the goals, thinking through the strategies, thinking through the paradigms. So don't forget that there is a really good network of collaboration. The Board of Trade has already been brought up, and other local businesses, but try to like unlock those people in your mind that like the town frequently collaborates with, other organizations collaborate with, because, you know, there might be something that feels really unmanageable for just this body, but could be a really interesting door that opens with collaboration.
Absolutely. Yep. Very good point.
And I'll just add, I think what we're hoping that we can help you all with is to not have you have to decide which track you want to take, but to give you a really solid roadmap for how you would do those different things, and potential collaborators and potential grant funds to help you with some of those activities. So we'll try to collect that, but if you can send us as you're kind of collecting your thoughts, and you do know right off the bat, like you want to partner with a local business or a community organization, let us know so that we can make sure that we can capture that so that it can live in kind of this planning document.
Perfect.
Thank you.
With that in mind, it sounds like we're feeling pretty okay about it.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of it is really just kind of a forum free-for-all here. And there's only a handful of things in here that we didn't really touch on in detail tonight. But I want to just get everybody's thoughts on how they're feeling about the document as a whole. We've talked a little bit about some sections that could be added and some words that we can refine and change to make it sound better. Again, knowing there hasn't been a whole lot of time to look at this, any kind of initial gut reactions or thoughts or feedback that you have to have, we're happy to receive that. And of course, happy to receive any of it throughout the next month or so online.
Can I pose a quick question to the committee? Earlier, you had asked about the joint meeting with the zoning board and the planning board. Thinking through some of the things that you've already been talking about tonight, would it be inappropriate to also add the master plan implementation committee? Because some of the items that are on their list, we're creating a trust. Some of the items on the master plan, we're charged with a future version of a trust.
Mhm.
Would that be an additional committee that would be okay to add to that joint invitation?
Yeah, that'd
Yeah, I
be
don't
good.
see why not.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
More the merrier, right?
Yep.
We'll get snacks or something, really bring them in. Cocktails? No, I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Cocktails maybe not a good idea.
So, any other thoughts before we move forward and talk about the engagement piece?
So within this document, yeah, I know we talked about, SOPs for, certain activities and things like that. Is that going to live within this document, or are those standard operating procedures going to be separate from this?
I think separate, no?
I think we were not planning on writing all of those. I think that it makes sense for this to kind of be a standalone. And then I know that we had talked about helping you all think through like how to build out your webpage.
Mhm.
So I could see those maybe if you wanted to have them on your webpage separately.
Okay.
If you want to include them, you can. But those might kind of evolve and grow as you're doing more work. So it might make sense to have them kind of live separately, but you can still put them on your website so that people can have access to them.
I think generally speaking, the SOPs should be living in a way that should live through multiple strategic plans and multiple versions over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And as long as the procedures of the town don't change, and I would imagine they're fairly set in stone, you guys should be in a good place to kind of put something together and have that be kind of that institutional knowledge documentation kind of thing.
I think in an ideal world, I think SOP from a business perspective makes sense. We may even call them rules and regulations. That's something that you could adopt, because then they could get codified in the town's code as well. The way that the zoning board, the planning board, other groups have rules and regulations. If appropriate, some of those SOP standards are likely to be things that are legalities. And so if maybe there's an SOP, but there's some of that turns into rules and regulations that then go in the town code. They're easily, findable by a resident, by a business owner, by a developer. It helps to, kind of create cornerstones for how this group will exist for 5, 10, 20 years, in a way that kind of mirrors how a lot of our other structures are set up. So it's consumable for people.
And I think it is a lot of good things for building transparency and institutionalizing and things like that as well. Everyone wants to know what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it.
Yep. And
then you'll have your procedures and rules for the body, and then procedures and rules for any programs that you want to put together too, and decide who you're going to accept from and all that kind of thing.
Just thinking about the conversation we had here today, it might be useful to incorporate into this document where town meeting comes into these processes, especially around funding, because that's also going to, reassure the people who want to be able to have that vote at town meeting, and pave the way for how they're going to participate in all of this.
That's a very good point. Thank you.
I really like the idea of us including something that you all have a clear mission as a board, but then also maybe having a section for how the public can participate and work with you all, and kind of a commitment to community engagement. I think that it maybe falls under the capacity section, but just thinking about deliberately bringing in the public at certain points so that you can kind of build that relationship with the community.
Absolutely.
All right, any other burning thoughts before we move on? You guys are great. We always stay on time. This is the only group that every meeting seems to move right along the way it needs to. So thank you all a lot. I know that was a lot of stuff to kind of think about and process in a short period of time. I look forward to hearing any other additional thoughts that are collected that Jackie's able to get from you guys and send that over. And we're happy to incorporate all of that stuff into this as it moves forward. I think the feedback that we got from you all tonight is great. The conversation's been great tonight. And we're going to move on to the engagement portion. And our scope calls for something called an online open house. And what we mean by that is a online survey that stays open for a number of weeks. Everyone's encouraged to go out there and fill it out and give us their thoughts. I don't want this to be something that is so long that nobody wants to do it, and not so short that we don't get the feedback that we need. So it's really striking a good balance here. And this is also something that is very new to the town. It's going to be very new to the residents, especially at a time when there's lots of like housing things kind of happening between this and the 3A work and the IZ and whatever else. We're also on our end at MAPC happy to put together a short webinar where we can kind of just have a direct conversation with the folks in town and allow them a chance to ask questions and really kind of frame what this is and what this would look like. So if that's something that you all are open to, that's something that we think would make sense to have scheduled at the beginning of January at some point, and then and follow that with the opening of the online open house and have people go on there and start taking it, and get to a place where we feel like we can get everything taken care of and processed and get it all back together to have a more refined version of this and share those results for when we get together in February. So we're going to ask them about the engagement stuff, ask them if they like the impacts that you all put together, if there's anything that's kind of missing there. We see kind of asking them to maybe order those in priority or choose like what are the top 3 that you see as the most important. Ask questions about the different tracks that we put together and potential trust activities, if those are things people would like you guys to see happen. Maybe some questions around funding. Would you support a small percentage of the general fund being allocated to housing, affordable housing or things like that? And then some other just general questions about housing and affordable housing in general, similar to what we ask people at the focus groups. So some of that could be qualitative and say, what kinds of housing struggles have you seen? Or maybe we'll have some check marks that say, check off any of the things that you see as personally a concern or struggle in your household. And then in addition to this information, we would also have a handful of questions that are just standard demographic questions to understand who exactly it is that we're talking to. So we ask things like income, age, ethnicity, and home ownership status and things like that. So they're all designed to mirror census questions so we can see exactly how they compare to the town and stuff like that. And I want to just make sure that there's anything that you guys want to make sure is included on there, that we do that. So that's part of why I wanted to bring this up and why I have it kind of structured the way that we do on this slide. It's kind of vague. It'll be much more fleshed out, of course, by the time it goes to the public, but I want to make sure that anything that you guys for sure want to get out of this, that we're getting out of it.
Would we have an opportunity to review the survey before it goes live?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to take a look at it first and just kind of see how it's organized, how it's structured, the wording behind it. Make sure there is an opportunity, like you said, for, at the end of it, for people to provide comments, feedback, ask any questions that, may not have been addressed if they were unable to meet at a focus group or anything like that.
Sure, of course. Any other thoughts?
If there's going to be a webinar option, I think one other thing that we could do is work with our cable access folks and get it on local cable, because there are some folks that may not want to or be able to take it online. And I think it'd be great to have it like running on cable access for a couple of weeks so people have a chance to tune in and just consume that information in that way, if that's the path we move forward with. I could also certainly speak to the COA about doing a viewing party, or the library even about a viewing party one evening where they put it on for people that want to come in person to watch the webinar.
That sounds fantastic.
We can also do paper surveys as like an accompaniment, because especially like older folks don't like to always do it online. So we can once you all approve the final survey, we can have it available and then have it just returned to Jackie at Town Hall, and that way that can go into the final collection of data.
It'd be great to do, because then we can have them at the COA, the library, and the tax collector's office. Those are our big 3 spots that we distribute.
Yeah, if you guys wanted to do something where you had like some little watch parties, and then at the end of it, they all get paper copies of the survey, they can fill them out there, hand them out back. That's certainly something that we're open and amenable to. And the way that we see this working as well is we do the webinar, we have the short conversation with people. We don't think it's going to take very long. I don't see a need to talk to people for an hour and a half about this. But just enough so that they understand what's going on, they understand what the questions are and how to answer them. And then once that video is done, we will embed that into the online open house survey itself. So when people log into it, there'll be a little, whatever it is, YouTube window, and say, if you didn't watch this and you want to learn the background on this, click here to do so. If you don't want to, then you can keep moving on. So that's how we see it being structured.
And then are we making this survey anonymous, or are we requiring the people? Okay, I like that idea, just to the fact that people, feel comfortable speaking the truth, come, straightforward with us. Not that they wouldn't if they put their name behind it too, but I think we get more honest feedback when we make it anonymous.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's going to be done, a little bit at the end of the planning process. It's not the kind of planning process where, unlike a master plan where we want to capture as many names and emails and add them to the list and keep them updated across future things. It's not that kind of thing. So if people want to share information with us and say if you'd like the trust to contact you about something you've said, put your information here. Otherwise, keep it completely anonymous, and that's totally my preferred way of doing it too. I agree. I think we'll get more honest feedback that way.
So the solid waste committee, what was the response we got with our survey?
130 or
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
How are we getting the survey out?
That's a great question and a good segue into our next slide. The roles and responsibilities of the partners.
It's like being at a meeting with a talk show host. It's awesome.
Mostly I was asking because I think part of the challenge with Anonymous is just, are we getting information from people who actually live in Middleton?
That's
Yeah.
usually a demographic question we ask. Is like, do you live here, work here? Neither.
Yeah, so that'll be part of it. So our job at MAPC, building the survey, processing the results, doing the short webinar, and then preparing the results for you all, and of course working everything into the final document here. The town, we're going to have the ask that this goes on the website and social media, any other kinds of broadcast towers you have to shot this from. We are going to encourage all of that. So any other ways that you can engage residents or let them know. Other common ways have been, flyers of the library, things like that. We're going to take a look at our budget and see if we have some wiggle room to maybe do some social media advertising, because we can really geo-target that to the town specifically and say, maybe if you're a Middleton resident and you're on Facebook, this will just become another thing that pops up on your screen that'll hopefully grab your attention. And then for you all, I'm asking everybody here to tell all the other boards and committees that you sit on that this is something that's happening. Post on your own personal social media about it, and make direct asks to your friends and neighbors to participate. So not just posting something on your wall that says, "Hey guys, this would be cool. You should do it." Like really, picking up the phone or going next door when you see Bill out there with his barbecue and saying, "Hey man, this is really important. We need everybody's thoughts on this, and would really appreciate it if you could take 10 minutes to please go do this thing." And those direct asks are much more impactful than kind of just blanket asks.
Yep.
So I will be asking all of you to think about your networks, think about the people that you know, invite them to the webinar, invite them to take the online open house, and do everything we can to have this as essentially focused as we need it to be. And if anybody has strong partnerships with local businesses that get a lot of foot traffic, that would be a great thing that we could kind of explore as well and put together some small flyers or something like that they could put up or hand out to people or something to that effect. So we have a lot of different ways we could kind of think about putting this together and getting the word out, but this is mostly how we see the division of labor for making this a success. And for anyone watching, if all of you filled this out when it's available, I think that would be a good success if we were able to get a couple hundred people just out of that engagement.
I will put in a plug that one of the members of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee did bring the survey directly to the transfer station one Saturday.
I was just going to say the same exact thing.
Yeah. So if somebody's willing to volunteer, I can do a Wednesday, but some other folks can volunteer for Saturday, Sunday. That's a surefire way to get quite a few folks. And so to John's point, we can get it out for you on our homepage and on our channels. We'll announce it at select board meetings. We'll get it onto cable access as a bulletin and then get the webinar going. I'm actually working on my submission for the COA newsletter tomorrow. That goes out for January, February. So I will incorporate this with, if that's all right, into my column that I do in the COA newsletter. And we can get it out and like all of our various stopping points, all of our public access points in the buildings. And then typically we occasionally get things into the school newsletters. But if someone has a connection there, that's always helpful. The transfer station is a big deal. And then I'll work with Jillian, maybe we'll do a webinar watching party for the COA in particular. So they'll do a showing, pass out surveys and collect them. I'll try to see if I can get that on the schedule for January with that group.
Great, and we have our check-in tomorrow. I think we should be able to get a date set then.
Excellent.
One note on the webinar that John and I had talked about, since you all are new, we thought that it would be kind of nice for you all to open and like kind of share, kind of introduce yourselves, not to put you on the spot, but I think it's nice for like the Middleton residents to hear from you all since you're the ones doing the work. So, you could open, kind of explain why you're formed and what you're doing and why you wanted to work with us on this project, and then you can turn it over to us to kind of go through the nuts and bolts. But just wanted to throw that out there to see if y'all are amenable.
Do we have any volunteers who wants to open for
I
the?
volunteer Brian.
Brian.
I was gonna say, I'm just gonna say, we're gonna volunteer Brian to do it.
We were all thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
We
it's Brian.
volunteer Brian.
Yeah.
And I
We'll write
think
it
he would
down.
like it.
I also think, to be fair, I think Bill would help him.
Funny how we were all thinking
Yeah.
the same thing.
Bill would help him
Yeah.
too. Brian and Bill are not here tonight, so they'll both be volunteered.
Yep, for not showing up.
Do we want to take a vote on that?
Yes, I make a motion
New business?
to make Brian the spokesperson on that webinar for not showing up for the last few meetings.
We'll never miss a meeting again.
I'm sure he had good reasons, no doubt.
No
But-
doubt. But yeah, we see this as being a relatively short thing, maybe just like a half hour, and something that's easily digestible for folks. Something that try to make this as fun as we possibly can with all of it, and get people to the point where they leave this feeling good, feeling empowered, feeling as though we're making them part of this process and not just talking at them.
Being talked at, exactly.
Yeah, that's no good, man. I'm not about any of that kind of stuff. We want people to feel good about this, to feel that the town is recognized that there is a housing problem, recognize that everybody is part of this housing problem, and everyone needs to be part of the solution as well. And I think as long as we're able to convey that and get their trust to the point where we feel we're going to get honest feedback from them, I think we're in good shape.
Other thing too is if we book a date at the COA to do a daytime program, if there's one or two of you that want to come and join me, that they always love to see a friendly face. Richard, you'll come by. I talk to them a lot, so I'm sure they'll be grateful to not have to listen to me.
Oh, come on, Jackie. Sure
I
they-
can probably get time off if I
I'm
told
sure
them.
they like you.
No, it's just nice to have some,
New faces.
new faces.
New faces. say.
I go in with a lot of updates, so it'd be nice to have some
Sure.
new faces for sure.
Let us know dates.
Yeah, I'll let everybody know.
We'll get it figured out. I'm not entirely particular about a certain date or a certain time of day or anything like that. Whatever we got to do to make it work, I'm confident we'll be able to do so. And before we move on, any other questions, thoughts about this or what we're doing, how we're doing it?
Nope.
We're feeling good?
Yeah, I think everything's going smoothly, going well.
Good. Yeah.
Good job.
So then the last little bit, as we always do, we got our little wrap up with where we're at in our timeline. We are past the assessment part of this, so I got that in light blue. And we're moved into the middle of the strategies part where we have something drafted, but it is not yet finished. And we're refining the strategy scenarios, we're building out the engagement activity, and soon we're going to be comparing the communications materials as well. We've had internal conversations with our communications department. They know that this stuff is coming down the pipe and they're prepped for being able to get this work knocked out in January and a little bit into February if we need it. And just be able to put some things together for communicating that this is this body and this is what we're here to do and here to help. So I think we're going to get some kind of template stuff from them where we can kind of fill in some more details once the plan is finished. So I'm feeling like we're going to be in really good shape to do that. I think that everything is kind of lined up schedule-wise, so we're going to get everything that we need. I don't think that we necessarily need to have strong decisions on things right now, but we'll have digital materials that can be shared online that speak to the work that the trust wants to do and the fact that this is a new body. and other printout materials that we'll be able to make available for you all as well. But I did want to just kind of get a real quick gut check on if there was anything for sure that felt was important to communicate or communicate in a certain way, or things that we 100% for sure did not want to do. Anything that we should avoid, colors, iconography, anything like that. We don't want anyone to think y'all are repping the wrong gang here.
Nothing that I can think of.
Okay.
off the top of
Not
my head.
Comic Sans.
Not, no, yeah, for sure.
Oh, bummer.
Do you foresee that online open house and survey being available after our next January meeting? And then for our January meeting, going over some of those questions then? Or do you want us to go over the questions before then?
What I think we'll do is we'll get the online open house questions set. We'll send you all a draft of what it looks like. Probably just like the online portal before it goes live, and have you click through and let us know if you have any feedback.
Okay.
I don't think it's the kind of thing that we necessarily need to sit down and discuss together unless there's a lot of concerns that people have with it, and then maybe we pump the brakes a little bit. But I think we'll be in good shape to kind of move forward with it that way. I do see it coming online after the 3rd. I think doing it on the 1st or 2nd is impractical, and with all the things in the holidays and who's here and who's not and who's off work or whatever, like it's best just to kind of avoid that talk. So I think it will make sense to launch it that 2nd week of January, keep it open for a couple weeks, and then give us a little bit of a cushion to kind of process what those results look like, incorporate any changes that we may need to into this document. I think at the very least we'll want to incorporate some of the feedback we get, or maybe some of the direct quotes if they're usable, as they kind of correspond with how things look here. And then have that kind of craft the final version of what this looks like moving forward, and then be able to share that with you all at the meeting in February and saying, this is what we heard, this is what people have to say, this is how it got worked into the document, this is how we're making sure that we're doing everything that's reflective of what people want.
Very good.
And the same thing go through Jackie if there's, when you show that to us, to go through to her. Right, okay.
I think that we can also try to provide some example communication materials, maybe from other trusts or something.
Yeah.
And we can try to send those so that we'll send them to Jackie. And then if there are ones that you really like or you really don't like, you can let us know so that we can use that feedback to shape those.
Yep, I like that idea, not reinventing the wheel.
Right. Yeah.
Life's too short. So the next time we get together, it'll be February 8th, I believe we decided.
January 3rd for this group and
January
February
3rd,
8th for you guys.
So the next time MAPC gets together with you all, review of the engagement activity, review of the communications materials, and then the refined draft plan, and be able to have a conversation about that and hopefully feel really good about it. So that's where we're at, and that's everything that I have for tonight.
Nice. Thank you. I want to thank you guys. You put a lot of work and effort into this, both of you. I think this was an excellent first draft of, what we were expecting. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you all for
Agreed.
the input and the frank conversation. It's really been this communication stream and the willingness to work together that's gotten us to the point where we're at. We're just a conduit of putting things together.
Perfect.
And thanks for having me tonight. I've heard a lot about Middleton, but it's my first time being able to meet you all. So it's really been nice to be here.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions for John or Andrea?
No, I don't. No. Good job.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Let's see. Review revised declaration of trust, votes may be taken.
Not worth doing without all 7 of you here.
Definitely.
Yeah, but we've sort of had this on the agenda a few times.
We
People are
have.
pushing it down the road.
We are a little bit, but we need
Cool.
hopefully January 3rd. I've already started sending communication to Bill and Brian just to be like confirming that they can attend that, or if not, we need to reschedule it so that we can wrap this up because I want it done with
Yep.
myself.
Agreed.
I hate that it's dragging, but we really should have all 7 of the initial trustees available
I
to
think
finish
so.
it.
If we can, yes.
So January 3rd will be our, January 3rd is our next meeting,
Unless Jackie hears otherwise.
unless
Yeah.
otherwise communicated. Anyone have anything else that they want to discuss?
I'm good.
All right. I'll make a, sorry.
I had one item.
Yes.
So the select board has started doing department updates where department heads are going in and providing updates on what they're working on. I am kind of awkward because I am a department of human resources, but I'm also the assistant town administrator. I am providing the December 19th update. I know Brian is the liaison, but he's missed a couple. So with your permission, I'll give an update on progress of this committee during my department update at that select board meeting on the 19th. Just to keep them in the loop with what's coming out with the survey and the engagement.
That'd be great.
Absolutely.
That'd be excellent. Thank you.
Of course.
All right. With that said, I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are closed.